Welcome on my first step ever. I'm so thrilled to say this that we are nearly approaching a 150 episode. But before we reach that, I'm so grateful and so happy that we always have such amazing people on this podcast and such amazing stories that help us take that one step further towards our first step, because the behind the scene, the work that we put into it's so important, and that helps us build the conviction. And this is what exactly this podcast is for, to help you build that conviction in your goals and to keep moving towards it to reach your first step, because that's the most hardest. So let me welcome, and please join me in welcoming an amazing person on this podcast, because he has willingly helped us to share his own story of his first steps, to take us behind the scenes of his first steps so we can also learn a bit from his. So please join me in welcoming Michael.
First and foremost, thank you for having me, Ishani. I'm Michael Glassock. I'm from the UK, from a county called Essex, so not too far from London. I suppose I'm a career and confidence coach, but also have a role at a university. And it wasn't always like that. I actually transitioned careers myself, so it'd be a pleasure to share my journey and, like you said, help those people who are taking their first step as well. So thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much for being on this podcast. So, before we get into those questions, those amazing stories that Michael is here for, I like to give a sneak peek into who Michael really is and what he really does. So, Michael has a deep passion for everyone in this world to gain self awareness and take action on creating and following their own path. Only once we stray from what society, peers, and even our parents deem what a success is, we realize what our own version of success looks like and feels like. My God, this is so aligned with what we do over here. And that's why we are happy that we're going to have a different perspective, who have similar values, and we're aligned in that way. And also, you are also kind of, helping people to kind of ultimately see the goal is to wake up every day with the sole focus of inspiring people to do what inspires them and pursue a life worth living. Now,
Amen.
there is so much that's happening behind the scenes. I know that there was some sort of, an eye-opening moment, an aha moment in your mid-20s that helped you, that sort of kind of give you that nudge to leave your 6 year worth of career in healthcare industry to become a coach and a speaker for those wanting to change careers. Now, we are going to talk a lot about, building the confidence and how does one transition between different jobs, and even, if someone wants to do something of their own. But the underlying factors about our own self-worth, what we really think about ourselves, our values, and how do we start from there to keep taking that first step. So on that note, Michael, let me start by asking, please take us through your childhood. What kind of mindset were you surrounded with, and what kind of people were you surrounded with?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for, it's a great question to start. I would say, first and foremost, so I come, my mum's Jamaican, and my dad's from East London in the UK. So I came from kind of a mixed heritage background, and I would be what you call a second generation immigrant. So I was born in the UK, whereas my mum was born in Jamaica. Now, the reason why I say that is because a lot of people who maybe are from a similar background will kind of, I suppose, associate with this. You take on some of that kind of immigrant mentality of like chasing stability, chasing security. Money is quite important as a source of stability and kind of having the foundation set in your life. And that had quite a big impact on my early years in terms of the careers. I very much ventured in business. I was initially going to go into accounting. I was quite good at accounting initially. And of course, we'll get into it, how that kind of started to change into where I am now. But that was a big piece around my mindset in my early childhood of chasing stability, chasing security. And it wasn't kind of verbally communicated, like, you need to do this, but it's just what kind of, I suppose, through osmosis almost, through the surroundings I was surrounded by, that's what I focused on. So I would say that was a key piece for me in terms of my early childhood and my upbringing.
That's fantastic. I mean, you have already analyzed that for us. You have given that out to us, that what really your childhood really, sort of fed into your head about what you are looking out of for yourself in life, or what is important for you, what are your values. And as you mentioned, that was stability.
Mm.
So just to kind of understand from there, you were raised up with that kind of mindset, those values. So this is what you're looking out for, and with that clarity in mind, what was happening in your early teens or in your university time? Because that is, and I always love to ask this question to our guest speakers, because that is such a fragile time. Your thought process, your perspective, your thinking can actually change, shatter, or can be rebuilt. So, what were you going through at that point in time?
Absolutely, I completely agree with what you said there. I think it's quite key formative years in terms of your career and ultimately your wider life. So I was incredibly fortunate where the degree I entered, so it was like accounting and business, or accounting and finance, I should say, was what I submitted in terms of my initial degree. And regardless of the business discipline where I studied, so I actually studied at University of Essex, where I now have a role there. So I've kind of gone full circle. It is
Wow.
you do the same four modules. So you do something around accounting, something around economics, something around quantitative methods, and something around business management. So regardless of discipline, first year is always the same. And although I did quite well in accounting, I absolutely fell in love with business management and ultimately the behaviours of people. And it's no wonder why I'm in the career I'm in now. But from there, I actually transitioned my course from accounting and finance to a business management degree. And that was like the initial twig. And I think it's Steve Jobs often mentioned when he looked back on his life, in particular for him, he did a calligraphy class, which often informed the kind of typeface of the Apple
Mm.
and of the keyboards. But it's only by looking back with hindsight you can see how these little steps, I suppose, allowed you to become to where you are today. And I think for me, now I'm in this reflective space, that was one of the initial first steps of that fascination of people as opposed to just chasing kind of numbers and money. And not to say that's bad, but for me, that was my interest. That was I suppose, a passion of mine. So that was quite a big formative step. I still didn't quite get the message. I still chased kind of business and financial industry once I left at university. But then, as soon as I fell into initially a contemporary art gallery, which really opened my mind up to, I suppose, what else is out there and the value the art industry can bring. That was actually in an accounts intern role, and that finally was a nail in the coffin for accounts roles. I truly realised I never want to do accounting again. I have to, of course, do a certain level as a business owner myself, but as an out and out role, that was a nail in the coffin. And I'll circle back to that later around steps youth can take and people can take. It's important as much as the things you enjoy as the things you don't enjoy to give you a bit of a direction in life. So straight away from there, I could disregard all accounting jobs, go forward with business roles, fell into the NHS, and then that's where some of the next steps, I suppose, happened in my career.
Well, I see that from this standpoint, where you're standing right now, you can obviously reflect and make sense of everything. But let's just transport to that particular time, Michael. Like you
Mm-hmm.
are in your 20s, and you
Mm-hmm.
are in, let's say, mid 20s. You have had that situation where you have kind of dipped your feet into maybe accountancy and business. You know what you like, and you also started to realize, oh, maybe accountancy is not what I'm looking for, but you're yet not clear in your head. And the reason we are standing right now with you in your story here is because a lot of our listeners are probably around that age, or maybe still in that stage of their life, in phases, in many ways, if we are not accounting for age, but the phase, when you are in a dilemma sort of a thing. What was going in your head at that point in time that you kept moving on and you kept transitioning? Where did you get the courage from, or what was your internal dialogue? How did you navigate your confusion, dilemmas, or whatever it looked like for you back then?
Absolutely. So I think there's this facade that everyone has like this master plan that it's already like you've got all these steps set out in front of you and it's all strategic and everything like that. I think when I look back in hindsight, I often was an incredibly curious individual and I still am to this day. Lifelong learning is one of my values, so it's like a core component of what I do, I suppose. And I would constantly throw stuff at the wall to see what sticks. So I would try new opportunities, try new projects, do new trainings. And that's, I suppose, that internal dialogue piece was always being curious, always trying new things. And that's what led me on my windy road. There's a term called squiggly careers. Our careers often aren't just like a line; they're squiggly. They go up, they go down, they go all over the shop. And that internal dialogue was exactly that. I knew that I inherently wasn't happy in terms of a core kind of financial institution or administration. I knew that wasn't something I was interested in. And, speaking frankly, I fell into the NHS. I didn't seek out the NHS. I saw it was a graduate role. I saw that I'd be working in kind of 4 different departments, which was really interesting for me because I love variety. Again, that might circle back later in our conversation around some of the key steps people, especially youth, can take in terms of seeking variety. But when I did that graduate role initially, that was really when my foundation, my internal dialogue started to be a little more clearer. Definitely not, crystal clear, but I started to ultimately realize that me personally, I love contributing to something that's wider than me. So I like contributing to a purpose that's wider than myself. That you can still earn lots of money, you can still do all the other things that are important for you, but ultimately at the core fundamental of my being, that's incredibly important to me. Again, no wonder why I'm in the profession I am in now. So that was a bit of a window into my kind of internal dialogue at the time, I would say.
This is very insightful, Michael. I think, and having that ability to kind of think from that point of view, probably that helped you set things very clear for you down the line, and you were able to make those choices early on, I would say, because your focus was that where you can contribute to the bigger purpose. And
Mm-hmm.
as you mentioned, doing all the stuff that's necessary, in fact, for a lot of us who are kind of building a life, our finances, our and also in this phase when we are building ourselves, we are trying to figure ourselves out, our focus, our purpose, but alongside we also have to have a lot of money, because that's what we think is very, very, that definitely is essential. But
Mm-hmm.
you know getting overboard with something like that, and then also having the feeling of comparison, so all these kind of things that kind of happen around that time, probably time and again. Were you in that phase as well? And if not, did you have you seen that around yourself? And what would you recommend our listeners to kind of work if they are in that dilemma?
Yeah, so just so I'm clear, I suppose that the question is around if someone's unclear on what to do in terms of their next steps and they're a bit confused about what to do going forward. What my suggestion would be is that what you're saying?
Yes, of course. But added to that particular thing, I also wanted to kind of understand, when you are trying to figure out your career, you also are kind of putting that pressure of how come you have not figured it out right now.
Mm-hmm.
You need to kind of earn x amount of money,
Ah,
and then
I see.
and then you start comparing,
Yeah,
and then you go down the rabbit hole of what's nothing's going to work out for me.
yeah.
So I definitely see that in your journey you were making some logical decisions, and
Mm-hmm.
how much these parameters came into effect
Yeah.
in your decisions, which I feel maybe not. But if you've seen that around in your circle, how would you help people get over that?
Absolutely, yes, yeah. I suppose for me, and the bit in what you actually mentioned in my bio of sorts about what I'm about, and again, there's some similarities to what we might circle back to later, is to define your version of success. And I really feel quite passionate. There's 2 key things that I often talk a lot about, and it's that define your version of success and values, and how values don't just need to be pretty words on a piece of paper. They can actually have a tangible purpose and ultimately the compass, and give you direction in your life, how you live your life. Those are the 2 core concepts I suppose I speak a lot about. Now, define your version of success is incredibly important. And what I mean by that is not what society sets out. It's not the Bugatti. It's not the Rolex on the wrist. It's not kind of living a life to impress others, but feeling empty inside, I may argue. There's obviously a level, but for rather than kind of have an external focus and kind of focus on other people, what they think about you, focus on how you feel about yourself. It could also mean just your family and your friends. Now, that's often the hardest piece. Now, especially again, coming from a second gen immigrant background, I was quite lucky that I wasn't kind of forced too hard around certain careers. We always joke about you're either a lawyer, doctor, engineer, or failure. If you come from an ethnic
Yes, heard
background,
that.
exactly that. So you're either lawyer, doctor, engineer, or a failure. So that it might be their definition, your parents' definition of success, and of course you hold your parents' view in the highest of respect. But have a think about why they are suggesting those things. One, it might have been the best thing for them in their time, in their career. So often in the past, if we reflect and we look back, and there's data to support this, you were rewarded higher for staying in a career for a long period of time. So doctors, lawyers, engineers, if you were there for 10, 15, 20 years, you were often rewarded higher, and it would give you more benefits from doing that. Now, it's not just a case of changing jobs every kind of 2 to 3 years. It's even portfolio careers of having multiple jobs at the same time. So that same track and that same thinking is slightly kind of, I suppose, is changed, and it's a different discourse today. So although you respect your parents' point of view, it's having that conversation with them to say, I know you love me, I know you care for me, and that's why you're setting me down this route. Okay. But my version of success is not to work at somewhere 10, 15 years. My version of success is X. And the reason why I love this is because every single person's definition will be different. And that is the most important thing to take home from today in terms of your career, in terms of your life. This can apply to any aspect of life. What is your version of success? Once you have that idea, that version might just be what you want to do for the next month. It doesn't have to be a master plan for the next 50 years. You don't have to overwhelm yourself. It's just what's the next step. You can then align your actions to that place you want to go. And that's a lot of what my coaching is about. Where are you now? Where do you want to get to? What are the barriers in between? How can we overcome them? It's all about where do you want to get to? Where are you now? And what do we need to do to get to that space?
Wow, I think we got a bit of a Michael, the coach, feel over here right now. And I think this is definitely a high point in our chat so far. And I want to kind of draw I want to highlight this to our listeners that whenever you are stuck in this rut,
Mhm.
whenever you are feeling worthless, this is the place where you need to kind of, sit down and relax and understand that what does these things mean to you, because ultimately everything is coming down to that. The reason that you're feeling in a certain way, anxious or not being good enough or not yet being there or not having what you really want is probably because you need to kind of work on what your values are, or maybe reconnect with what your values are. Maybe you've done this exercise. It's often easy to kind of deter from that path, and because there's lots of distractions over there, so that's all good. So thank you so much, Michael, for staying in your late 20s over here with us right now and giving us that amazing piece of advice. So moving on from here, from where we exactly come to know in your story, as you mentioned, where you had dropped off, which is that was the place when you exactly that you hit the nail of the head and you got to know, oh, this is what I am really, really looking forward to doing in my life. Please take it from there, and please kind of take us through your journey of how really the first steps of your coaching journey began.
Absolutely, yeah. It's quite it's quite an interesting journey, an interesting story. That's I suppose got both positive and negative connotations depending on how you look at it. So I obviously entered the world of the NHS. I was a graduate role, got to do multiple different things. Kind of progressed roughly 3 to 4 times, I suppose 4 times over 6 years. So I was a graduate, then I was an ops team leader, then a project manager, and then like a strategy manager. So kind of progressed the ranks quite quickly. And still to this very day, absolutely love what the National Health Service in the UK stands for, and how it's free at the point of entry for people. I think that's something that should be available across the whole world, but that's just my view. Unfortunately, it's underfunded and all the rest of it, but we won't go quite into that. But for me, it gave me so much experience in terms of helping people and supporting people. But what I could quickly see, I was starting to get into lots of rooms, lots of meetings, and not seeing the impact I was having in terms of my earlier days. And that's what gave me the most joy, seeing the impact I had on individuals, communities, and ultimately patients in terms of my service. Now, that coupled, although I had that niggling thought, it still didn't drive me to a place of action. So I knew this, and I was starting to feel a bit kind of disenfranchised, I suppose, with where I was. The biggest thing that really pushed me to a place of action was actually my dad. who received a diagnosis in Alzheimer's in 2021. Now, whether you like it or not, that will chuck your world upside down, and that will allow you to reflect on everything, not just your career, but your life. And although I don't subscribe to the live life like it's your last day, I think that's a bit too extreme. That whole process of my dad with Alzheimer's did make me realize how sacred life is. And actually, do I want to just plod along? You know, I could argue maybe because of the level and the speed I progress, say in another 5 years, I might be some sort of transformation director in the NHS. But would I truly be happy in that space? And for me, the answer was a resounding no. Because I don't think I would have that interaction and really see the impact I was having on individuals. So from there, I reflected on my career. I reflected on the things I enjoyed most, which was ultimately helping people. I fell upon this little word called coaching. I'd read lots of books. I did lots of research. Something I often speak about quite a lot is there's a particular episode by, I don't have to even introduce him now because of how big he's got, but Diary of a CEO by Stephen Bartlett. He had a chap called Jordan Peterson, who's a Canadian clinical psychologist, and he was talking a lot about self-worth, self-awareness and self-reflection. And that led me into coaching, did a few webinars, did a short course, did a chartered kind of a recognized course by the International Coaching Federation. So I really want to take this seriously. And then from there, the rest is history. And that is really was the catalyst for my change. And the thing I feel so passionate about is I don't want other people to have to have lost a loved one, go through a national pandemic like COVID, to finally wake up and make that decision. So ultimately, that's why my purpose, my why, is to inspire people to do what inspires them, rather than have the heartbreak that I had to go through to finally actually make that change and finally take action.
That was quite a journey, Michael, that you took. And yes, some good realizations out there, but leading from some difficult and challenging situations. Yeah. But I am glad that you are in a position to kind of, help people who really, really need to kind of, understand how they can navigate their life way forward, and who better than you who actually is so passionate about that, and you really want to do that. I want to kind of, it's really kind of nice to understand how you came about understanding this is what you want to do, and you went out there, you researched, you trained yourself, you did your bit of homework, your groundwork, everything, and then you obviously started your own coaching services. But as whenever you start something and start something of your own, even if someone is kind of transitioning between jobs, like they are, for example, even if you're a 9 to 5 job, even that's very challenging. If you're beginning with something, I want to kind of take a bit of your help over here for our listeners and understand from your journey, what are the top 3 challenges that if you can generalize, that people can face in this situation, so that they are mentally prepared, at least that they will face some challenges of these sort. And like, which one was that for you, and how did you really combat that?
Absolutely. I think this speaks a lot to, like, I suppose, planning your move and planning where you want to go to, and I suppose starting to try to understand what the challenges you might foresee and might have to face. Of course, there will be things that you won't have imagined, but that is life. I think the first bit is I suppose that lack of clarity. I think people, you said the internal dialogue is a good way to word it. People have no idea where to start. They often feel quite overwhelmed. And that's why, to circle back to that previous example, when I was a accounts intern at a contemporary art gallery, that taught me a tremendous amount. So if you are looking at a business discipline and looking at business jobs, it can often feel quite overwhelming because there are so many different aspects of business that you could potentially go and specialize in. And accounting, if I was to just have a rough guess, might be, say, 15 to 20% of all of those business disciplines. So it's not always finding the things you enjoy and the things that interest you in the passions. Sometimes the data that can be given to you in terms of things you don't like can equally be as helpful. So by doing that accounts intern role, like I said, that was finally the nail in the coffin for me to finally realize I definitely don't want to do anything to do with accounts. And in that one instant, I could disregard almost like 15 to 20% of jobs in a business discipline like that. And if you go onto any kind of recruiting website or anything like that, you have your filters, straight away I could untick accounting. And that helps reduce the overwhelm just slightly. So I think not just what you do like, it's often what you don't like can help you. And then from there, that might give you initial direction on what to then research. So obviously I looked back and I suppose did a piece around self-reflection to understand what are some of the things I enjoyed most in my career. I always talk about the thing I enjoyed the most for my job, regardless of how many things I made go from red to green or KPIs move, was when I was an ops team leader, I had an administrator who didn't enjoy their role. And I was one of the very few that actually enjoyed one-to-ones. Most managers hate one-to-ones. I loved them. Again, another sign for my kind of people interaction. And through the one-to-ones, we realised we actually helped them transition roles from admin to a clinical role, and they're now more in a nursing capacity. So by having that understanding, I could then research how could I do that more often, whatever job I was doing. It might not be 100% of the role I'm doing, but now I'm armed with what I don't like. I'm armed with what I do like. How can I find roles that say at least 60% of the roles and responsibilities are doing that thing and ignoring the things I don't like? So that's, again, a very tangible step rather than getting overwhelmed of what just to do going forward. And then I suppose from there, you gain some clarity now of some of the job roles and some of the industries that might be at least 50% of the job is doing the things you like and reducing as much as possible the things you don't like. Now you can then seek those people out, which is exactly what I did. So I did that both with coaching and both with my university role as a careers officer, so helping graduates and postgrads with their careers. I reached out to me 5 years on. So I reached out to careers officers. I reached out to coaching practitioners and coaching professionals and had Zoom calls, emails to see what's the reality of the career like. You know, I often say Suits is about the lawyers and it glamorizes it and it's amazing. Well, often when you speak to people who are in the law or legal profession, 90% of the role is research papers. It's very different to the razzmatazz of Suits that it shows. So if you can understand what you don't like, understand what you do like, take research on roles and responsibilities that align with that, and then from there, then reach out to people to see what the reality of those careers and jobs are. One, it will help you clarify whether this is a next step you want to take. But two, it might even give you networking in those careers, in those industries to take said first step, that's exactly what it did to me. And that's often one of the key fundamentals I do when I coach individuals. Once we've got to that person, they've got the mindset, they know the career, they know the path. How can we strategically actually connect with people in that industry?
You have definitely given us some really concrete, practical steps out there to carry out. And what's really amazing is that the steps that you have, or the advice that you have shared with us, is actually for everyone, in the sense that even if they're unclear, this is the filtering process that you have used, and which takes us a little bit closer to what we might like to do. And I like the balance of at least 60% is something that you like, and even 40% if you don't. And the most important bit out of this is, and what I really liked is when you mentioned that find out what the reality of a job really is, or what you think and what it really is actually, it could be very different. So thank you so much, Michael, for being on my first step ever, for introducing all these things to us. And I am so happy that you're on this podcast. You've really given us some really quick and very important piece of advice through your journey and how you took your first step. Before we take our guest speakers leave, I always request them to leave our listeners with a quote or a saying that they really resonate with. But before that, because we have you over here, I'm going to ask one bonus question. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Which is, and that is your forte. I can see that immense confidence that you have, probably that you were born with or you've worked on, you've built that throughout the years. I would love you to leave our listeners with one tip on how can they build this self-confidence.
Absolutely. So this is going to shatter people's dreams. It's so simple to do, but equally it's quite disheartening, I suppose. And that's simply confidence follows action. Confidence follows action. When I joined as a graduate, I wouldn't say boo to a goose. That's a UK expression. I wouldn't speak to people. I'd be scared. I'd be shy. I'd start speaking to people. Eventually, I'd start speaking to professionals. Then I'd start doing team meetings. Then I'd occasionally have to do a speaking gig to external stakeholders. Then I got asked to do my very first radio interview on behalf of the organisation I was working for. Now I host my own podcast. Now I actually look forward to coming on to things like this and speaking to yourself. So confidence follows action. Whatever you want to be confident in, how can you take 1% closer to that place? Is it you record yourself? No one likes listening to themselves. You record yourself, you listen to yourself. Then you record yourself and send it to your best friend because you know you don't fear the judgment of your best friend. Then you send it to a professional colleague. Then you do it in person to the best friend. Then you do it in person to a professional. You slowly build it up 1%, 1%, 1%. And if you were to take an action every single week, I believe there's, 52 weeks in a year, just think how far you could progress if you took an action every single week. So for me, for that confidence piece, it's often oversold. You have to spend thousands of pounds for all these courses. Confidence follows, okay? It is followed by action. Just take action and your confidence will grow.
That's incredible. Confidence grows when you take actions and when you see yourself progress or even you see yourself improve. Thank you so much, Michael, for being
Absolutely.
on my first step ever. And to wrap up this episode, could you please leave our listeners with a quote or a saying that it really resonated with?
Absolutely. And you'll see the reason for what I've shared for my journey and just what I shared now. My mantra that I live by to this day is become comfortable with the uncomfortable. Soon as someone asks me to do something and you get that pit in your stomach, you think, oh, I got speaking. Oh, I don't want to do that. Straight away, I know I have to do that. Because the more I become comfortable with the uncomfortable, my box expands. I've become more comfortable with skills. My experience grows and the rest is history. So become comfortable with the uncomfortable is my mantra.
There you have it, my listeners. That is what we wrap up the episode with. Get comfortable with uncomfortable. Take small steps each day. Thank you so much, Michael, for being on my first step ever. You have been truly amazing and actually kind of, bringing those amazing experiences of yours in really crisp and really clear, actionable words that everything that you've mentioned today. And it was a really good journey for me, for myself, personally as well, to listen to what you have to say. And I can definitely say that you are such a friendly coach. I can definitely say that to all the listeners out there. I'm sure you would love to kind of get a little bit more about Michael, get to know about him. So I'm going to leave a little bit about him in the show notes and link to even his podcast if you would like to hear, which is Catapult Your Career. And yes, so you can also follow him on his social media platforms. Love to always connect my listeners to anyone who can provide and contribute and provide some value. And Michael, you have done much more than that today, so thank you so much for
Thank
being on
you.
my first step ever. And as I always say to all my listeners, start believing in yourself and keep believing in yourself. See you until next time with one more amazing story that can take you closer to your first step.